All but one playoff spot has been decided in the East. Still plenty to be figured out in the West. Plus, only one playoff matchup is set so far. We'll tell you whose fans are celebrating and whose fans are booing on this edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, where we give you a nightly recap of all the games in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs. I'm Eddie Garcia out in Los Angeles. In addition to my game night duties, I'm also the host of Locked On LA Kings.
I'm Shukri Wright's host and producer for 97.5 The Fanatic Philadelphia, where I am currently, and we are going to bring you the latest goals, saves, and highlights from across the National Hockey League on what has been a very busy and eventful night in the NHL. And you mentioned about cheering and boos, not the typical fan behavior, because in one city there were certainly a lot more boos than cheers, and can't wait to get into it with you in just a moment.
We'll get to that in a minute, but they were cheering in Ottawa, where the Senators were taking on the Islanders. This one was on Long Island, but Ottawa gets a 3-0 shutout victory. Linus Ullmark, 23 saves of the shutout. Ridley Gregg had a shorthanded goal, his 13th of the year. Jake Sanderson, a power play goal, his 14th of the year. And with that, the Ottawa Senators have clinched a playoff spot. 7 straight seasons they missed the playoffs, but the Sens are now going to the postseason for the second year in a row.
Congratulations to Ottawa. You're back in the playoffs after a certain point in the season where I wasn't sure if they were going to make it back, but a bit of a late season charge. They did it. And in regards to like Ottawa tonight, you really got some like really big like performances from Amadio, and as well as like Jake Sanderson as well, and really Gregg. And I thought that, Ottawa really played with a greater deal of urgency, and the Islanders just flat out was short. They were short, and they were very flat, to put it mildly.
And it's been a very rocky season for Linus Ullmark. Left the team for personal reasons. He's been very open about his battles with mental health, but gets the shutout here and gets the Sens into the postseason. Congratulations to Ottawa, back in the playoffs once again. For the New York Islanders, obviously a tough loss, but they're still not out of it just yet. Let's get a check on them from the host of Locked On New York Islanders, Gil Martin.
The New York Islanders fall to the Ottawa Senators 3-0 in a game where the Islanders essentially beat themselves. The power play 0 for 5, only 3 shots on goal, and they allowed a shorthanded goal, which was the only goal of the game up until the closing minutes, when the Islanders took 2 bad penalties, gave up a 5-on-3 goal, and then an empty net goal. Overall, this team came up small in a big situation, did not maintain the intensity they needed to, and just took some dumb penalties and made some bad plays. The power play has been this team's undoing all year long, and it's kind of fitting that it was their undoing in this game that puts them on the brink of elimination. Got to come back at it tomorrow against the Canadiens and hope for a lot of help, but the Islanders' chances of making the playoffs very slim after this disappointing loss. For more in-depth daily coverage of your New York Islanders, check out the Locked On Islanders podcast.
And thanks to Gil Martin for that report. So the Islanders are 3 points back at Philadelphia for third of the Metropolitan. They're going to have to win out and hope that Philadelphia loses out. And as Gil said, 2 more games for the Islanders, and they're against tough opponents, Carolina and Montreal.
I mean, the Islanders did it to themselves. It's just that simple. The power play and what Gil said in his report, he was absolutely right. The power play has been the problem all season long on the island. And today, when they needed the power play the most, where was the power play to be found? 5 power plays, you couldn't score on at least one of them. That tells you the entire story of the 2025-26 New York Islanders.
So the Islanders are on the brink. Meanwhile, the Red Wings are out. They lose at home to the New Jersey Devils by a score of 5-3. 10th straight season, the Red Wings will not make the playoffs. That's the current longest playoff drought in the NHL now that the Sabres are going to make it. And nothing like getting booed off the ice on fan appreciation night, but it was deserved. And the Red Wings did not play very well down the stretch. They had many opportunities, held leads late, could not hold on to them, like this game where they had a 3-2 lead in the third, allowed 3 straight goals, and that was the difference. On January 24th, Detroit was tied with Carolina for first in the Eastern Conference. They had a 12-point cushion for a playoff spot. They went 9-14-4 the rest of the way.
I mean, this is jarring that the Detroit Red Wings went on an extended slump. You can understand maybe a week or two and you'll bounce back and whatnot, but you talking about from the end of January on, they never found themselves back on even footing again for the remainder of the season. And in a game that they absolutely had to win in order to still have a fighter's chance at the Stanley Cup playoffs, that third period was indicative of how the final 2.5 months of the regular season has gone for the Detroit Red Wings, which has been an absolute unmitigated disaster.
Bruins were hosting the Lightning, looking to get into the playoffs, but Tampa Bay gets a 2-1 win. The Lightning were down 1-0 in the third, but Brandon Hagel's 36th of the year tied it. Emil Lindbergh's 4th of the year was the game winner, and Andrei Vasilevsky allowed 1 goal on 20 shots in net. Probably going to win the Vezina Trophy this year. For Boston, Morgan Geekie had his 38th in a losing effort. However, Boston still clinches a playoff spot because they got some help. Let's get a report from the host of Locked On Boston Bruins, Ian McLaren.
Are officially going back to the Stanley Cup playoffs. This is Ian McLaren of Locked On Boston Bruins, and after a long 1-year absence, the Bruins have clinched a playoff spot, even though they have lost 5 games in a row. But thanks to the New York Islanders losing to the Ottawa Senators earlier today, and the Detroit Red Wings losing to the New Jersey Devils, the Bruins have clinched their spot with 2 games remaining on the regular season schedule. Look, nobody had high expectations for this team coming into this season. Thought they'd be a bubble wildcard team. That's kind of what they ended up being. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty big turnaround from where they were at this point last year. And there's been some pretty meaningful contributions from some guys who were brought in to help carry on with this retool. What will the Bruins do when the Stanley Cup playoffs arrive? Who absolutely knows? But they're back in. They've got a fighting chance, one of 16 teams to clinch a playoff spot, and they will compete for Lord Stanley's mug.
All right, thanks to Ian McLaren for that. Can't win if you're not in. And the Boston Bruins, your Boston Bruins, Shukri writes, are in the playoffs.
Congratulations. You still pooped the bed. And it doesn't help the matter. And I hate to be the negative guy. I mean, maybe a bit of the Boston negativity has rubbed off on me. But yeah, you've lost 5 in a row, and you were up 1-0 on the Morgan Geekie call that opening scoring in this one. I'm happy that they're in the playoffs. Let me start there. I am, but you still pooped the bed. You blew the lead. You've lost 5 in a row, and there are legitimate concerns going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. But at the same time, I do think that, like the Bruins, considering where they were a year ago, this is an accomplishment. I absolutely agree with Ian. I 100% agree with him unequivocally, because a year ago, I was of the people that wanted Don Sweeney gone. I questioned his direction in regards to where was he going with this retool or rebuild for this organization, and here we are a year later, a draft later, and the Boston Bruins are back in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and now you have a chance to potentially, you never know, make a run for the Stanley Cup, and we'll see what happens.
For Tampa Bay with the win, they are 2 points back of Buffalo for first in the Atlantic. They're tied with Montreal with 104 points. They hold the tiebreaker over the Canadiens, so if they end up meeting in the first round of the playoffs, the Lightning would have home ice advantage. The Flyers rolled to a 7-1 win over the Jets in Winnipeg. Sean Couturier had 2 goals, numbers 11 and 12. Matvei Michkov gets his 18th, and Porter Matone gets his 3rd of the year as some of the young guys getting it done for the Flyers. Let's check in with the host, one of the hosts of Locked On Philadelphia Flyers, Rachel Donner, for a report.
Flyers and Dan Vladar bounced back with a vengeance with a huge 7-1 win over the Winnipeg Jets. Hi, I'm Rachel Donner from Locked On Flyers. In the last game, the Flyers lost a tough one to Detroit, and Dan Vladar got pulled from the net. This time around was very different. Flyers got off to a great start with a fantastic feed from Travis Konechny to Porter Martone for the rookie's 3rd goal of the season, maintaining his point-per-game pace to kick off his NHL career. Other than the 1 goal that Vladar might want back, Vladar made some key saves throughout the rest of the game, which was extremely important for his consistency. Captain Sean Couturier added 2 goals of his own as part of a critical 4th-line performance. That group with Glendening and Hathaway had been a huge part of the Flyers' late-season success here. Michkov and Sanheim had tremendous shots that got past Hellebuck. Noah Cates got a shorty. Even Nick Seeler got in on the action as the Flyers tied their season-high total in goals for a game. We'll have more on it on our Monday show.
All right, thanks to Rachel for that report. Flyers are holding on to that final spot in the East. They're 3rd in the Metro. Final 2 games against Montreal and Carolina. We'll see if they can hold on to that final playoff spot in the East.
I don't think it's a matter of whether they will be able to. I genuinely do believe that they will be able to. I do think that, like they firmly, even after tonight's win, it's more than they're in control of their own playoff destiny. Win one of the 2 games at home, against Carolina or against Montreal, you're in. That's where we're at currently. And I just think that for Philadelphia, for the Flyers, like their playoff drought, it's about to end. I'm going to say that confidently, not on a hot take basis, but based on what I've seen and the way and how dominant they have been playing overall, with the exception of the game against the Red Wings on Thursday in Detroit, like this team has been on an absolute run for the better part of the last month or so. And they're now coming home to play the final 2 games of the regular season, and they are literally on the cusp of punching the ticket to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And what a time it is for the people here in the city of Philadelphia and across the Delaware Valley.
All right, and the Winnipeg Jets, by the way, 5 points out of the final wildcard spot in the West. So they're not officially out, but their playoff hopes are on life support. We had the Canadians hosting the Blue Jackets. Columbus having to win this game to stay alive. They get the 5-2 victory. Let's get a report from the host of Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets, Jay Forster.
Blue Jackets needed a win, and they got one with a 5-2 win over the Montreal Canadiens. They started strong. They had an excellent second period. They finished strong. A little bit too much crime for my liking, a lot of penalties, but the penalty kill was excellent. I think only allowed 1 goal on the night. Jet Greaves, spectacular. Charlie Coyle, 2 goals. Like, kind of the perfect win, Unfortunately, they got bad out-of-town scoreboard luck. The Flyers won as well, so they continue in the chase. But that was about as convincing a win as you could have hoped for, and the Blue Jackets' hopes stay alive. They move on to Boston tomorrow, where they also need a win. We'll see how that goes. That's all coming up, and we'll talk about it on Monday's edition of Locked On Blue Jackets. Stay tuned.
All right, thanks to Jay Forster for that. So the Blue Jackets still alive, 2 points back of Philadelphia for 3rd in the Metro, with 2 games left, as you heard him say, Boston and then Washington to close out the season.
And this is why I think all of Philadelphia will be rooting for the Boston Bruins tomorrow. Shocking to say, like for the mere fact that, you need the Bruins to win in order to keep the Columbus Blue Jackets at bay. You create a distance between yourselves, the Flyers, that is, and as well as the New York Islanders, and you need to do more of the same, when it comes to the Columbus Blue Jackets as well. They do have a critical game coming up, as we just alluded to, but you got to give credit where credit's due. Charlie Coyle had a huge game tonight, 2 goals in this one, which was absolutely critical for this Blue Jackets team to maintaining their playoff hopes and keeping it alive.
For Montreal, Cole Caulfield did get his 51st goal of the season. And as I mentioned earlier, Montreal tied with Tampa Bay, 104 points, but Tampa Bay does have the tiebreaker. All right, we're going to check in on the West wildcard chase as two more teams are eliminated in the West, while one team is punching its playoff ticket. We'll give you the details next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Spring is a natural reset point, and there is one thing that can quietly cost businesses money, and it's messy communications, missed calls, scattered text, and no clear thread of who said what. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2 with over 3,000 reviews, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses. It lets your entire team share one business number so you never miss a call, text, or opportunity. Everything lives in one clean thread, calls, texts, and voicemails. The whole team sees the conversation so nothing falls through the cracks. And the AI summary saves serious time by logging calls and highlighting the next steps automatically. It just makes your business feel more organized and responsive. Make this a season that no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/LockedOnNHL. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNHL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. One more team to check in on the Eastern wildcard race, and that was the Washington Capitals. Needed a win in Pittsburgh to keep their hopes alive, and they would get that win with a 6-3 victory. Ilya Protas, the younger brother of Alexei Protas, scored his first NHL goal, and his big brother also scored a goal as well. Alexei gets his 25th of the year. Ryan Leonard, 2 goals, numbers 19 and 20. And Alexander Ovechkin, maybe playing the final games of his NHL career. We don't know. He's going to decide in the offseason. He gets his 32nd goal of the year. Washington is still alive, barely. They're 3 points back of Philadelphia with 2 to go. Obviously, like the Islanders, they've got to win out and hope that the Flyers lose out, but Washington is still alive for now.
Washington still very much is alive for now, but, like today was a very much a sentimental type of day for the NHL in regards to Crosby and Ovechkin. Unfortunately, Crosby did not play in this one. However, Alex Ovechkin did, and he scored a goal in this one, an important one to keep the Capitals' playoff chances alive for now. And ultimately, like, we got to witness like 21 years of probably the greatest single player rivalry the sport has ever known, and it was rivalry that frankly actually saved the NHL post lockout. So today, in more ways than one, it was bittersweet not to see Crosby play against Ovechkin potentially for the last time. Who knows what Ovechkin does decide to do in the offseason, but certainly it was a important 2 points that the Washington Capitals were able to gain against a team in the Pittsburgh Penguins that already punched its ticket to the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, Pens and Caps play again on Sunday in D.C., so maybe Crosby plays in that one, maybe not, but we do get another shot to maybe see Crosby Ovechkin once again. My LA Kings were hosting the Edmonton Oilers, and I was witness for this one, final regular season home game for Captain Anze Kopitar. And LA gets a 1-0 victory. Artemi Panarin's 28th of the year on the breakaway. The only goal of the game, and Anton Forsberg, who's been inserted into the lineup as the #1 goalie, made it stand up with a 27-save performance. Kings have won a season tying 4 games in a row. And again, Anze Kopitar playing his last regular season home game. We're hoping there's still some playoff games to come. Kings right now holding on to that final wildcard spot in the West. They are 1 point up on Nashville. Kings do have a game in hand on the Predators. LA also just 2 points back of Anaheim for third in the Pacific, so we're keeping an eye on that as well. By the way, the Oilers, even with this loss, did clinch a playoff spot thanks to the Winnipeg Jets losing. So the Oilers are back in again as well.
Congratulations to both teams on punching their tickets to the Stanley Cup playoffs, and congratulations to Anze Kopitar, 20 years of incredible play, like being the all-time point scorer in the history of the LA Kings. Fabulous and remarkable career, one that I believe will actually have him end up in the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. But as far as the game was concerned, like the Kings winning 1-0 in this economy, that part actually surprised me, considering that that the Kings had struggled to maintain the level of play, especially in close games or in 1-0 games like this. But it was very much impressive to see to see them do that, especially for us with keeping it a 1-0 game, and the only goal being scored by was the one that was scored by Artemi Panarin.
The Nashville Predators did keep pace, though, with the Kings, remained 1 point out of that wild card spot in the West thanks to a 2-1 win over the Minnesota Wild. Steven Stamkos gets his 40th goal of the season, 8th time in his career. He's hit the 40-goal mark. Matthew Wood gets the game winner, his 17th, and Justus Anonen had another good game, the backup goalie for the Preds. He allowed 1 goal on 22 shots. So once again, Nashville 1 point back of LA for the final wildcard spot in the West. However, Predators have 2 games left. The Kings have 3. So that certainly working against Nashville. Final 2 games for the Predators as well. Not easy. Sharks and Ducks to close out the season.
And this is an important win for the Predators, in which that they were able to get important 2 points in this one against the Minnesota Wild. In which that, listen, like Nashville, I think they're gonna pretty much battle and fight to the bitter end. And for Steven Stamkos, for him to score 40 goals this season, considering where he was at the beginning of the year, where many people wondered if age had finally caught up to him and whatnot, and now like he has another 40-goal campaign under his belt, is pretty remarkable and impressive.
The Sharks tried to keep their faint playoff hopes alive, hosting the Canucks. Got to get 2 points against the worst team in the NHL. They don't do it. They lost in a shootout on home ice to Vancouver, 4-3. Linus Karlsson with the game winner in the 6th round of the shootout for Vancouver, as the Canucks tied it up late to send it into overtime. For the Sharks, Igor Chinichov had 2 goals, number 6 and 7, but San Jose, again, can't leave points on the table. They only get the 1 point here. They're 5 points out of the final wildcard spot with 3 games to go. So again, not officially eliminated, but the Sharks are on life support here as well.
They pretty much are. Like tonight was, a little bit of a disappointing game. Like despite the fact that Chernyshov, he had 2 goals in this one, and did his part to try to give the San Jose Sharks like a bit of a jumper to life, but to no avail. And ultimately, when you talk about the Vancouver Canucks, they wanted to play the role of spoiler, and they did exactly just that. In their win, in which that Jake DeBrusk scored an important power play goal that tied up the game at 2-2. So you gotta give Vancouver Canucks credit for playing the role of spoiler.
Meanwhile, the Kraken beat the Flames at home 4-1. Nikkei Koko, 1 goal allowed on 27 shots in net for his first NHL win and his first NHL start for Seattle. Jordan Eberle gets his 26th of the year. Matty Beniers his 20th. However, because of that win by the LA Kings, the Kraken have been officially eliminated from the playoffs. They were a team that was flirting with a playoff spot for a while, but faded down the stretch. And so Seattle will be missing the postseason once again.
Unfortunately, the Seattle Kraken, they're going to miss the playoffs. But I give the credit to the Kraken for showing fight in this game, scoring 4 unanswered goals. In which that after Zustowicz scored the opening goal to give the Calgary Flames a 1-0 lead, like the Kraken showing a great deal of fight and grit. They not only tied the game thanks to Gaudreau's 6th goal of the year, but as well as took the lead on Stevenson's go-ahead goal to give them a 2-1 lead, in which that the Kraken never relinquished. A disappointing season for sure, but one that the Kraken will look back on and look at the lessons learned from this past season.
All right, Vegas is looking to clinch a playoff spot, but they'd have to beat the top team in the NHL to do it. We'll tell you about that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club for ad-free episodes and access to our Discord group chat. Head to lockedonnhl.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes. We have the St. Louis Blues taking care of the Chicago Blackhawks with a 5-3 win in Chicago. St. Louis scoring 3 goals in the second period. Jimmy Snuggerud and Jordan Kyrou each getting their 18th, and Cam Fowler had the game winner, his 4th of the year. Ilya Mikheyev scored 2 for Chicago, numbers 17 and 18. But with that win, because the Kings also won, St. Louis, like Seattle, also officially eliminated from the playoffs. The Blues, one of 4 teams that made the playoffs last year that so far has been officially eliminated this year as they join Florida, Toronto, and New Jersey.
Isn't it amazing how difficult it is to make the playoffs every single year in the NHL? I find it to be amazing. You think that the Blues, after making a bit of a late season run last year, making the playoffs, and this year just falling short, it goes to show you that just making the playoffs in the NHL is it's quite the challenge, quite the accomplishment. But then also, winning the cup is even harder than just simply making the playoffs. So the St. Louis Blues, I think pretty much from the beginning of that second period on, they just dominated in this one offensively, and they never looked back. So there's next year for St. Louis, and the same could be said for the Chicago Blackhawks as well.
Well, you talk about it hard being making the playoffs. Maybe that makes what the Vegas Golden Knights continue to do even that more amazing. As they beat the Colorado Avalanche on the road 3-2 in overtime. Jack Eichel gets the OT game winner. Carter Hart allowed 2 goals on 32 shots in net. Maybe he's the number 1 goalie right now for Vegas, as they're 5-0-1 under John Tortorella, and they move into first place in the Pacific Division. They're 1 point up on the Oilers. They clinch a playoff spot. 9 seasons in the NHL for the Vegas Golden Knights, and they've now been in the playoffs 8 times.
Which is remarkable, especially for a franchise as young as the Vegas Golden Knights, because yes, they are still a very young franchise. They've only been in the league now, let's say give or take 8 or 9 seasons now, and they've been in the playoffs all but except 1 season. And I think it speaks to the consistency. It doesn't mean that it's easy to make the playoffs every single year. This is not the norm. This is rather the exception rather than the norm. And for Vegas, in the year that they had, in which that they made the head coaching change very late in the season, moving on from Bruce Cassidy, bringing in to John Tortorella, and they're seemingly beginning to find their stride right at the right time for Colorado. This was simply a disappointing loss, but not the end of all be all. They already punched your ticket to the Stanley Cup playoffs and as well as the President's Trophy. So at this point, it's about them pretty much getting to the finish line healthy.
Nathan McKinnon did not have a goal in this one. We told you Cole Caulfield did for Montreal. So in the NHL goal scoring race, McKinnon has a 1-goal lead on Caulfield. You talk about healthy. Well, their head coach got hurt in this one. Jared Bednar took a puck to the face in this game and was going to be taken to the hospital to get checked out. So hopefully he will be okay. That was obviously disturbing to see that happen to their head coach. We had the Utah Mammoth at home losing to the Carolina Hurricanes 4-1. Both these teams have already punched their playoff tickets. Frederik Andersen in net for the Canes allowed 1 goal on 26 shots. Andrei Svechnikov gets his 31st of the year. Sebastian Aho his 27th in the win. For Utah, Dylan Gunther hits the 40-goal mark in a losing effort. Carolina, 110 points. They've got a 4-point lead on Buffalo for that top record in the Eastern Conference, or the most points, I should say, in the Eastern Conference.
Which is remarkable to think that Carolina, even going down to the wire, they're fighting for that number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference to ensure that they have home ice advantage throughout the entirety of the Stanley Cup playoffs up until the Cup final. Should the Colorado Avalanche don't get there, obviously they would have home ice advantage. But also, not to be forgotten, Jordan Staal, he reached the 20-goal mark for the first time in 10 years since the 2015-16 season. So congratulations to Jordan Staal on getting to the 20-goal plateau for the regular season. So Carolina continues to play a consistent game. Freddie Andersen, more of the same as well. Congratulations to Jordan Staal and the Carolina Hurricanes.
Dallas Stars get a 2-0 shutout win at home over the New York Rangers. Jake Ottinger, a 22-save shutout. Jason Robertson had both Dallas goals, numbers 43 and 44 on the season, as the Stars have clinched the number 2 seed in the Central Division. So this is the only playoff matchup that is set so far. Yep. Dallas will play Minnesota, and the Stars will have home ice advantage in that first round playoff series.
That's going to be one hell of a series, and I can't wait to talk more about it next weekend once the Stanley Cup playoffs gets underway. And man, I'm already chomping at the bits. There's already 2 Stanley Cup playoff series, and I'm already looking forward to. One is already official, obviously, the Stars and Wild. The other one potentially has the makings of being a bloodbath should it in fact become official, and that's Flyers Penguins. Should the Flyers in fact do punch the ticket to the Stanley Cup playoffs, that would be the first round matchup, and that would be one heck of a matchup itself.
And our final game, Toronto hosting Florida. They met in the second round of the playoffs last season. Maple Leafs were division champion. Panthers win their second straight Stanley Cup. Both of them are missing the playoffs this year, but Florida gets the 6-2 win. Tomas Nosek, his first 2 goals of the season for Florida. William Nylander in the loss, 2 goals for Toronto, numbers 27 and 28. Again, Panthers beat the Maple Leafs 6-2.
Isn't it amazing? And this proves my point earlier that I was making, how hard it is to make the playoffs every single year. But especially in the case of the Florida Panthers, where you were the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion, and that streak will in fact come to an end, given that they've already been eliminated from playoff contention. But for the Toronto Maple Leafs, this is just another disappointing loss on Hockey Night in Canada, in which that like outside of William Nylander scoring 2 goals, there really wasn't much of anything else going for the Maple Leafs in this one.
All right, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On NHL Game Night so you get all of the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On NHL Game Night ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonnhl.supercast.com to join the club. I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night. Don't forget, we're here for you through the entirety of the Stanley Cup playoffs as well. This is Locked On NHL Game Night and the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.